Closing arguments in the Trump trial underway. We had Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's defense attorney, in court defending the president, summarizing everything for the jurors to make it nice and digestible for them. And in doing so, he gave us 10 reasons why Trump is not guilty. And he saved that for the very end of the closing arguments. But we're going to go through, just like we were there, courtesy of our friend Inner City Press, Matthew Russell Lee reporting, and read through the excerpts to see what happened inside. Now, to set the scene, we had Donald Trump come out, of course, speak before the court session got underway, as is his usual routine. You see Todd Blanche to his left. We have the combo duo there, red and blue, power red for closing arguments.
It's a very sad day. This is a dark day in America. We have a rigged court case that should have never been brought, and it should have been brought in another jurisdiction. As you know, we asked for that, and the judge never allows us anything. And just to end, we had an election expert who was going to say everything was perfect. Where the FEC did nothing, it was fine. And we had a lot of other people. I could give you a list of 40 people that would say the exact same thing as these people said. So thank you all very much. We'll see how it goes. This is a very dangerous day for America. It's a very sad day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We appreciate it. We'll follow you inside, sir, and see what is happening. So that is what Trump said. Now let's get right into the closing arguments, courtesy of Inner City Press. Matthew Russell Lee reporting. Here is what he reports. Donald Trump is here. Closing arguments, day 21. Blue suit, red tie, power red. Chatting with his lawyer, Emile Beauvais, as Todd Blanche sips from a water bottle. Door burst open. Court clerk says, "All rise." Oh, gosh, Judge Mercon, how many times are we going to have to do this again? Clerk of the court says, "This is the time set for the people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump, indictment number 2023001. Judge Mercon says, "All right, good morning, everybody. You've got the court's proposed charges on Thursday. We read through the joint submissions here on yesterday's show. So they submitted a joint proposal about what the jury instructions should look like. We read through a bunch of them yesterday. They are wide open. It's a buffet, a smorgasbord of criminal charges, whatever you want. So then the court made some adjustments and sent them back in, right back out, and sent it back over to you. So you got our proposed charges on Thursday. Now, I didn't hear from either one of you, Trump or the government. Okay, so I presume they're okay. Now, how long will the arguments be here today? Trump's defense attorney, Todd, says 2.5 hours, 2.5 maybe hours. And the government says, well, if they're 2.5, we're going to have to be somewhat responsive to that. Plus, we've got our own arguments to make. So prosecutor says 4.5 hours. And in another X thread I was reading, someone else said that there were audible gasps. Some people in the court go, what? 4.5 hours? Sheesh. Judge says, well, we'll see if we can get it all in today. If the jurors can stay late, if they can, well, then we'll stay too. And I remind everybody, stay away from law in your closing arguments. I instruct the jurors on the law. You tell them and make arguments based around the facts. So then I'll tell them what the law is. Bring in the jury. Jury entering, every stanza. Jurors are now seated. The judge starts closing arguments. He tells the jurors, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back after the hiatus. You are now going to hear what we call summation arguments. And today we're going to be starting with the defense. Defense attorney Todd Blanche gestures to show jurors some slides with his clicker. He says, I hope everyone had a nice long weekend. Before we begin, we all want to thank you for your service here today. Play an important role in our system of justice, and it's important that you are here to decide the facts. And here are the facts. President Trump is innocent. He did not commit any crimes. Nothing that they have presented here in this courtroom has proven their case. And they've not met their burden of proof, which is their burden, not ours. And as I told you, ladies and gentlemen, 5 weeks ago when we started this whole trial, on April 22nd, I told you that you should want and expect more than the testimony of what we got here today. More than the testimony of Michael Cohen, who we're going to talk about, and all the problems that they brought with him before they shoved him on the stand and told you that he was the key to this entire case. You should expect more than Keith Davidson. You should expect more than Keith Davidson. He was trying to extort President Trump. It's their argument. Sorry, didn't mean to steal the thunder from you there, Todd. This case is about documents, ladies and gentlemen. Documents. It's a paper case. We have spreadsheets and 8.5 by 11s. It's not about an encounter with Stormy Daniels. It's not about something that happened 18 years ago. It's not about something that President Trump denies. No, this is about whether President Trump, the facts of their case, as they alleged in their indictment, indictment. It's about Trump. While he was living in the White House, acting in D.C. as the leader of the free world, as the person responsible for somehow book ledgers in New York from the Oval Office. Book ledgers. He was managing those. And it was his duty when he was organizing national defense and the executive branch of our entire federal government. He was focused on making sure that the ledgers in New York were accurate. And he was very focused so that they're not intending to influence the election. That's not what he was responsible for. So let's talk about the evidence here. Now, the invoices in this case, which were felonies, by the way, as charged offenses, were all submitted by who? Michael Cohen. We're going to come back to Michael Cohen and remind ourselves about his credibility, but we'll put a pin in that. But every one of them came from him. And so you cannot convict President Trump on the word of Michael Cohen. He claims contacts with Schiller and Dylan Howard and Alan Weisselberg. Cohen told you here that he colluded with them, with David and Dylan and Alan, all these people, but not one of them was called as a witness. How come? Well, it's because Cohen told lies, pure and simple. And if they would have called them as witnesses, it would have destroyed their fictional narrative. That's why they didn't call him, so that Cohen could lie. You would have to find, ladies and gentlemen, says Trump's defense, you would have to find in this case that the documents contain falsehoods and that President Trump intended to defraud someone or something. And so let's talk about this. Let's talk about Michael Cohen's invoices. Now, when we look at these, we know what the staff at Trump Tower did. They only stamped these items. We called a witness, or they called a witness. Deb Tarasoff was on the stand, and she came in and she told you. She went with what Michael Cohen put on the invoices. So remember, we have three different categories of crimes. One is the invoice, Michael Cohen. Every time he prints out an invoice, Trump gets charged with the felony. Isn't that convenient? So every time he sends an invoice, oh, felony. So Trump's just sitting in, oh, another one, another felony. Ding, hey, doorbell, post guy's here again. Hey, ding, another felony. So every single one, every time it lands, then they put it in a ledger entry. Oh, felony number 2. And then as soon as they cut a check, felony number 3. So Deb, nice Deb, is just brought in here. They say, hey, Deb, okay, we got just Michael Cohen sent an invoice in. She says, oh, sure, happy to log that. I don't want to be an accessory to a conspiracy, an accessory to business fraud. So she said, no problem. Fills out the invoice. Cohen wrote legal expense. So she drafts it down similarly. Now, the information on the check that was also then signed was auto-generated by the invoices. So it goes from invoice into the entry into an auto-generated check. No one is even double checking it. He's the lawyer. So some were emails and some were sent as attachments, but all of these were directed to Alan Weisselberg, ladies and gentlemen. None of these directed to President Trump anyways. Now, through no fault of her own, Deb, who was called here, who testified about this, she couldn't remember whether she stapled these particular invoices together because she did a lot. She did a lot of invoices. It's a big organization. She did a lot of work there, has been there for years. But in all her time there, in every time that she was there, she says she never did anything at the direction of President Trump. Never. But suddenly she did, I guess, in these? All of a sudden? No, she didn't. She was following what Michael Cohen wrote. Michael Cohen wrote for services rendered. And he was rendering services in 2017. There's not even a question about that. He was still providing services. He went into 2017 when Trump was the president. In May 2017, he wrote in his own logs, he says, call me to discuss the last open foundation matter. Yeah, that is representation. That's Michael Cohen acting as the attorney for the president. That's why he was getting paid. There was also litigation from Summer Zervos. Now, that's only 2 examples of Cohen doing work in 2017 when he got paid for legal services. Now, that's 2 examples. Now, even if it was only minimal, there was a retainer agreement. So, and retainer agreements can be verbal, as we've also heard, saying, and let's not get out of whack with our numbers in our brains here. Yes, the idea that Michael Cohen was getting $130,000, it might sound like a lot, but let's not forget that Michael Cohen got paid huge quantities of money. Michael Cohen took over $1 million from Novartis. He had 6 phone calls with them and got paid $1 million, ladies and gentlemen. So Trump paying him $35,000 a month for a retainer to wrap up some affairs from his personal life before he became president, it's nothing. Is there anything wrong with that? Apparently not for Michael. This wasn't out of the ordinary. He got paid big bucks for all sorts of things. Michael Cohen even bragged about this, ladies and gentlemen, about his role as President Trump's personal attorney to Sean Hannity. He's on the radio. Michael Cohen. And so everything you heard from Michael Cohen is a lie. Michael Cohen told you lies, and a lie is a lie. We go back, ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen, the facts show that Mr. Weisselberg asked Michael Cohen for the agreement. And you know, the fact that there was a verbal retainer agreement is consistent with another lawyer you heard from, the government themselves. They brought out Keith Davidson, and he talked about the regular use of verbal retainer agreements. Even he corroborates it. Now, the government is saying that's a weird thing. Oh, Trump and Cohen didn't have a retainer, but it's okay if their other attorneys do have a verbal retainer. Now, also, Mr. McConney, they brought him out. He's not a lawyer, and he told you of verbal retainers too. So now they're making this big thing. It's like Michael Cohen and Trump were engaged in some nefarious thing because they didn't have a written document. They have verbal retainers all the time. So what makes more sense when you think about it? That President Trump was paying his personal lawyer $35,000, which sounds right, or that Michael Cohen would work for free and then not tell anyone. Does that make sense? Now, in life, usually the simplest answer is the right one. The answer here is Michael Cohen lied. He was getting paid for Trump as his lawyer. He got busted by the feds. The feds said, "What do you have to turn on Trump?" He turned on Trump, made up some sort of false business record crime, which has left us here to save his own skin. Cooperate or else. So he cooperated. Simplest answer, Cohen lied. Blanche continues, he says, "Now there is no information, ladies and gentlemen, presented here that Trump knew anything about this voucher system." Now, I don't know how the government is even going to address that. We have had no evidence on it, and I don't know what they're going to say. But with quotes from a book with ghostwriters, apparently a decade earlier, that's going to be their evidence. Trump knew all about the inner operations of Trump Organization because he wrote a book about it in the 1990s when this conspiracy started. Got it. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's ridiculous. This was booked as a legal expense because that's what they did with anything that came in from a lawyer. It's a default categorization. There was literally in their system no other way to categorize it. Lawyer sends an invoice, they mark it as a legal expense. Crime of the century. The government calls it a crime. That's absurd. It's not a crime. Mr. McConney even came out and said so. In fact, if you look it up in the system, it's a drop-down menu, just like when you're going through your TurboTax. And you drop it down and it says legal expense. The government claimed it was a cover-up. What else are you supposed to put in there? That's not what the evidence showed. If there was some conspiracy, there's no reason to go get approval from Don Jr. and Eric. Now, you didn't hear from either one of them. How come they didn't call Don Jr.? How come they didn't call Eric? And the burden is on them to call, not us. You didn't hear from either one of them. Now, after a few months, the government moved Cohen, or they moved Cohen as personal attorney from the trust to President Trump himself. And there are 11 checks. Now, the first two were not even signed by President Trump. Those checks have none of Mr. Cohen's lawyer, just, quote, retainer on them. And two witnesses came out and told you, ladies and gentlemen, that President Trump was very busy. He was running the country, just got elected. Kind of a big deal. Now, sometimes he looked at the checks that came through and sometimes he did not. You heard that from multiple people here. Same with things that came through Federal Express. The First Lady and Ivanka also got info this way. Nothing sinister, sending packages to other people. Everyone does it. Next slide. Slide says case turns on Cohen. Now, the government is asking you to convict President Trump on the word of Michael Cohen. For 5 weeks, they asked you to believe Michael Cohen. Cohen asked you to believe that he was going to work for free. You heard from him. He sat there and told you that he was going to work for free because he's a nice guy. Do you believe that? He also talked about Redfinch, which he stole money from. $30,000, maybe grossed up for $60,000. That is absolutely a lie, ladies and gentlemen. He admitted it here on the stand. The gross it up allegation about them inflating the money for taxes or something, that is also a lie. Now, Cohen told you he had no idea and that he didn't even care about how these numbers came up. I don't care. They just wrote it down. And then the government's going to come out and they're going to suggest that there's some sort of a tax scheme, but they just made it up, grossing up. But there's been no proof of any of this. There's not even testimony from Mr. Cohen about this tax scheme. And when Cohen was on the stand, he told you about his visit to the White House in February 2017 after President Trump got elected. And he claims that President Trump only spoke about the checks. But only 6 days later, Cohen then emailed McConney, remember? And Cohen emailed him and said, remind me what the monthly amounts were. And so for all of those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, President Trump is not guilty. But I expect you'll never hear from Judge Merchan that a conscious intent to defraud would have to be shown. You're probably not going to hear that jury instruction about conscious intent and might they have to show it, but they can't show it because there was no conscious intent. We didn't want to defraud. Trump didn't want to defraud anybody. How would this be fraud when the Trump Organization reported it on their 1099 to the IRS? In black black and white, plain as day. There's nothing false or misleading about submitting a tax document to the government disclosing an expense. Now, McConney even came out and told you when he was on the stand. He said there's no way to distinguish on the 1099 form. You don't know what it's going for, so there's no intent to defraud anything on that form. But even if you get to anything about intent to influence an election, even if you go past that, okay, maybe he didn't have intent to defraud. You as the jurors are thinking here, you're going through the rules. Maybe it's not intent to defraud. What if it's intent to influence the election? Maybe that's what this could be. Well, if you go there, the prosecution still fails. They say that in 2017, Trump was influencing an election that he already won. That's their argument. Okay. So the crime happened in 2017 when the checks were written, when he was the president, and that was backtraced to influence an election that he already had won. So the timing is off. Now, every campaign, when you boil this down, is a conspiracy to win an election. Let's just be clear about that. Everyone wants to win. It's multiple people working together in common cause for an overt action, which is to win an election. And we all get that. But when it becomes illegal is when you have unlawful means. Everybody on a baseball team is conspiring to win, but can they do it legally or illegally? Same things here. Now, I expect that the government's going to come out here and argue that the August 2015 meeting with Mr. Pecker began a conspiracy. The AMI National Enquirer guy who did the deal with Karen McDougal, Droopy, who never even testified. So supposedly Hope Hicks was there, and you heard AMI, they would do what it could. You heard Pecker, he came out. But this wasn't some conspiracy using unlawful means. There was nothing unlawful about this at all. It was totally normal. In fact, AMI had been doing that for President Trump since the 1990s. You heard him say that. They also did things for other people, not just Donald Trump. In fact, they purchased stories for Tiger Woods. Remember he said that? They purchased stories for Mark Wahlberg. Of course you remember that one. And many politicians work with the media to promote their image. This happens all the time. This is not a crime, so it's not unlawful means. Now, Mr. Pecker also told you that he did this for other politicians as well. You might be sitting there saying, oh, Tiger Woods, well, he never was president. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger, remember he ran for governor of California. And Mr. Pecker bought stories for him and all of his affairs. He also did it for Rahm Emanuel too in an Illinois election. And no charges were brought against either one of them because it's not illegal. There are no claims that laws were broken, and that's why objection sustained. Defense attorney Blanche continues. Mr. Pecker suppressed a story for President Trump in 1988. 1988 is when he started this. It had been going on for years. It was good business for AMI. In fact, in August 2015, you remember, was just a general discussion. There was talking about Ted Cruz, the Zodiac killer, allegedly. At the 2018 August meeting, they also didn't discuss any catch or kill programs at that meeting. They didn't discuss any financial arrangement. Anyway, there's nothing abnormal about this anyways, even if you are catching and killing. Mr. Pecker told you that he only published half of the stories he bought, and this was their regular business model. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about some other stories that they bought. You remember the doorman? Let's talk about Dino Sajuden. You remember him. The love story, the love child story. That whole thing was entirely false. This happens all the time. Fake stories pop up. Pecker said if it was true, he would have published it. So that doesn't sound like a catch and kill. It sounds like a catch and maybe release it if it's true. It's not killing anything. Pecker said, no, if it's true, I absolutely would have published that. Are you kidding me? Pecker's not killing it. He's going to release it. This is what he does. He collects stories, and sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't. It's the cost of doing business. Now, he only talked with Mr. Cohen about it. That's all. And so what kind of catch and kill conspiracy is that? Pecker was literally going to publish it. If it was true, and Cohen admitted he had been following the trial as well, so Cohen knew what Pecker was going to say. Let's not forget that. Cohen says, well, I was just kind of following the story here and there. It's not that big of a deal. So Cohen's following what Pecker was going to say, and that's why he said again and again that he wanted to credit. He wanted credit. Cohen wanted to solve something for Trump. This was his ticket in. And McDougal, there was no Trump money paid at all. There was no money paid to her for that deal. And also, Miss McDougal did not want her story to come out. So how is that a catch and kill? Miss McDougal herself wanted the story killed. She wasn't out trying to publicize this. So why is AMI catching and killing that? They're not. A friend had forced her hand, in fact. A friend publicized her own allegations. And the government has alleged some sort of conspiracy to influence the election, but McDougal didn't want it out either. So it's not only Trump. Was McDougal running for president? No, she wasn't. She didn't want the story out because it was going to hurt her reputation. Trump didn't want it out because same thing. She wasn't running for president, but someone else forced her hand, and so she made made a deal. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, when David Pecker was on the stand, he told you that he spoke with a lawyer. Objection! Sustained. And Mr. Pecker also has an immunity agreement with the prosecutors. And so the AMI deal is probative of nothing. Objection! Sustained. Defense continues. Mr. Pecker told you that he was at an investor meeting in New Jersey, and there were some other people there with Chatham Asset Management, and that President Trump said, I don't buy stories. But Cohen's claims President Trump said, no problem, I will take care of it. And that's a big difference. I don't buy stories, as someone said, versus I will take care of it doesn't sound the same. It's because Michael Cohen is lying, including about a lunch. But you remember, Mr. Pecker never mentioned that. There are no receipts about that lunch. Pecker never brought it up. Cohen brought it up, but there are no receipts. But, for some reason, key meetings are remembered with clarity by Mr. Cohen from 2016. When you go back to that era, that's where he's really focusing his attention. And what about the recording of President Trump, ladies and gentlemen? Can you imagine a lawyer doing this? Recording their client secretly? Cohen said he recorded his own client in order to play it for Mr. Pecker, but he never played it for Mr. Pecker. And although Ronna Graff was supposedly there, they didn't ask her any questions about it either, including about why it was cut off. So why didn't the government ask her about that recording if she was in the room? On the recording, you can hear someone say, check as the beginning of the sentence. It's clearly the beginning of a sentence. We will never know. And at the end, it's Don or Dawn. Don, D-O-N, or Dawn. It's not clear, and it's not in the transcript, so we don't know. Is it Donald Trump, or is it Don, like someone else named? We don't know. Now, Mr. Cohen claims that he stopped his super important recording of his client to take a call from Capital One Bank. Remember that testimony? Trump's recorded. They're talking about moving some stuff around. Trump says, get me a Diet Coke, please. So they bring him a Coke, and they're having this debate. No, move this around. Let's pay cash. Let's do something. Then the phone call comes in, or something cuts off. Oh, hey, Don, something, and he takes the call. Apparently, it was from Capital One Bank. The form said NIOP CFNA VM. That is, it went to voicemail. It says the call forwarded, no answer. And so what you heard, ladies and gentlemen, was again, Michael Cohen lied. It said call forwarded, no answer. He didn't take that call. He lied about taking that call. The records show it right here. And what about Stormy Daniels? She denied the incident took place completely, but it was published in 2011. So how could this issue have influenced the election if this was published in 2011? So what happened here is there were people who wanted to export and exploit and extort money from President Trump. You heard from Ms. Rodriguez and from Davidson. You also heard that Michael Cohen paid for this on his own because he was worried about his future. The only person who says President Trump knew anything is Michael Cohen. The only one. And you cannot, ladies and gentlemen, you absolutely cannot believe the word of Michael Cohen. Dylan Howard was also brought up, and we know that he conspired with Stormy Daniels and with Gina Rodriguez to get money from President Trump. You never heard from Howard or Rodriguez, though, in this trial. Davidson, you heard from, and you heard of his plot. So Keith Davidson came in, and he tried to extort Hulk Hogan. He worked as a sex tape broker. That's what this guy did. He did it to others. He did it to Lindsay Lohan. He did it to Charlie Sheen. Here's the tape. After the election, he wrote, he said, we lose all effing leverage, so settle this effing case now. What you have here is objection. Sustained. Judge says, let's take a break here right now. And they pause. But we don't. We're back. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, gets asked, how much time do you have left, Todd? He says, I have half an hour left. Merchan says, well, the jurors say that they can work late. We might have to take a snack break. Bring in the jury. Jury comes in. All rise. All right. Please be seated. We're back. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to pick back up with Stormy Daniels. Now, what happened with Stormy Daniels in 2016, consistent with the conspiracy that prosecutors tell you President Trump, Mr. Pecker, and Cohen entered into in 2015. They say it's consistent, and so let's look at it. Now, Ms. Daniels repeatedly denied that there was any sex with President Trump. She said that repeatedly. Now, she tells you that she not only denied it due to a threat that she says was made to her in a parking lot in 2011, but they were lying about the threats, and they were trying to get money in the fall of 2016. And what happened in 2018? Well, Larry Flynt offered to pay Stormy Daniels legal fees, and then suddenly she had a podcast, and she had a book, she had a documentary. It ended pretty well for Ms. Daniels, financially speaking. Now, there's nothing criminal about a non-disclosure agreement. We have this stuff all the time. After the Access Hollywood tape came out, they seized at the opportunity. They knew Trump's campaign was having to deal with that. And so on October 8th, 2016, 2016, Miss Rodriguez, who was this talent agent woman, reminded Mr. Howard about Miss Daniels. Remember, she's got this claim. Howard thought AMI and Mr. Pecker would pay for that story, but they went back over to Mr. Pecker of AMI and he wouldn't pay. And that's it? That's our conspiracy? That's a crime? Somebody wants to sell a story that's not even real and we're charged with a crime because AMI wouldn't buy it? The Access Hollywood tape was personal to President Trump. No one wants their family exposed to that type of story. Hope Hicks told you he was very concerned about his wife when she came in and testified. You also heard from Miss Westerhouse. She told you that President Trump didn't freak out about the Access Hollywood tape. But let's listen to Michael Cohen and to Davidson. They played the tape. Cohen says, well, what about me? I wasn't going to play Pennywise, pound foolish. And so Cohen didn't tell President Trump. But Mr. Cohen said the amount is not really significant. He said he had multiple multi-million-dollar apartments. And Cohen lied to you. He said he didn't want a job in the administration. He told Keith Davidson the opposite. He said that he was in the running to be the Attorney General or the Chief of Staff. So he goes from, I don't even care about the administration, to thinking he's going to run the Justice Department. He just lies. Michael Cohen had an axe to grind with the president. Last week, Mr. Costello came to the stand and told you when he first met with Mr. Cohen that Mr. Cohen told him that President Trump did not know of the payments when they were made in 2016. You heard from him. He said Cohen was pacing around like a tiger. He was manic. He was talking about suicide. We said, hey, Michael, relax. And Mr. Cohen also lied to you about him. You heard from Costello, very credible person up here, prosecutor for 27 years, and he told you the truth, and Cohen lied to you about him. So, ladies and gentlemen, how many lies are too many? The president never signed the agreement, nor signed the letter. It was Mr. Cohen who added Trump's name to the side letter. What President Trump knew in 2016, you only know from one source. No one knows what's in his mind. The only person who suddenly knows is Cohen, but he's a liar. He claimed he spoke to President Trump on October 24th at 8:02 p.m. about the Stormy Daniels situation. It was a lie. He called Keith Schiller about the bodyguard liaison to Trump. He called about a 14-year-old prank caller. Ladies and gentlemen, that was perjury. The prosecution on redirect shows you an unremarkable photo that Schiller was with President Trump. Of course he was, but the prosecutors didn't do anything about Michael Cohen's perjury. Objection! Sustained. Mr. Cohen claimed that he made a call on his landline, but the records are in evidence, and objection. Go up for a sidebar with the judge, whispering. Todd Blanche comes back. Now, there are no calls to President Trump on that day from Mr. Cohen's phones on any of them. And there are a lot of ways that you can assess credibility, ladies and gentlemen, but we use an oath, and we've learned that Michael Cohen does not take that oath seriously. He's lied to his family. He's lied to his banker. He's lied to the FEC, to reporters. He is an MVP of liars, but he's not just a liar. He's also a thief. He admitted on the stand in this courtroom to stealing tens of thousands of dollars from the Trump organization on his way out. And he's never been prosecuted for that. Cohen has been obsessed with President Trump for 2 decades. In fact, remember when he said this? Play the audio. Cohen is there thanking Alvin Bragg, who I've met countless times, he says. Countless times? He's never met Alvin Bragg, says Blanche. He's made millions off President Trump. He's actively objection sustained. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I know I've been speaking a lot here today, and I thank you for listening, but I'm almost done. And here are 10 reasons for you to have reasonable doubt. The top 10 countdown, let's go. First, the invoices. They're charged as crimes here. Michael Cohen created them. He wrote them. He put what they were for. He sent them over to the Trump organization. They processed them like every other invoice. President Trump didn't know about them, nothing to do with them. The testimony confirms that. Number 2, second, the Valentine's Day 2017 voucher. There's no evidence that President Trump ever saw the voucher at all. And so there's no intent to defraud anything. In fact, we filed a 1099. They filed a 1099 to notify the government about this. And when the government comes out, they're going to argue that this was done to influence the 2016 election. How is that possible? The prosecutors are going to say it was under the FECA, but there's no evidence of any willful violation of the FECA or tax laws. What's the evidence that there was a violation of a tax law? Well, it comes only from Michael Cohen. It's only from his language. He just said they told him, gross it up, but there's no evidence of that at all. And 6, AMI would have to run Sajudin's story. So there's no catch and kill. So if they're publishing stories, they're catching and releasing the stories. So there's not some sort of gimmick here. If it was true that Trump and Stormy did the hibbity-dibbity, then they would have published it more likely, just like they would have with this case. And 7th, McDonald also. There was no catch catch and kill. McDougal wanted the case never brought to light. Her friend released it. And 8, Stormy Daniels' story was already public. So what were they covering up? And 9th is the manipulation of the evidence. We've caught them manipulating the evidence. They showed Mrs. Trump's text message. They showed to call her husband, but then there was no call. Now, they didn't show you the text about the 14-year-old caller. We showed you that. And when was the phone synced on this evidence? Who knows? No one knows. Mr. Cohen lied to you about all of this. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, number 10 is Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen is the biggest liar of all time. He's the human embodiment of reasonable doubt, walking around in a disgusting meat suit. He lied. He is biased and motivated to tell you a story that is not true. They say Tom Brady is the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Well, Cohen is the gloat, the greatest liar of all time. Todd Blanche, well done. Absolutely outstanding. Trump's lawyer, Todd Blanche, continues. Michael Cohen lied to each of you repeatedly. You cannot send someone to prison based on objection sustained. Now you see where this is going. You can't talk about penalties, okay? Because the last thing that our corrupt government wants you to do is notify the jurors about what the penalties are. Because if they knew what was happening, if you're like, wait a minute, this dude's gonna go to prison for 35 years for that little small bit of cocaine. Are you nuts? Are you out of your freaking mind? If the jurors knew that, they would nullify a huge portion of the laws. So you can't tell the jurors what the penalties are. Otherwise they'd say, our system is insane, you know? So Todd Blanche wraps it up. He says, thank you, jurors. You've been listening. Now, this isn't a referendum on President Trump. If you focus on the evidence, this is a quick, not guilty verdict. Judge Merchan continues, saying we'll come back and break at 2. Now, before they leave, the jury is excused, of course, for the break, but the judge is furious about that comment. Says, Mr. Blanche, your comment about President Trump facing jail was outrageous. I will give a curative instruction and see you back here at 2.